The silence within these ancient stone walls carried a weight, a cold promise that clung to your spine before the first pale dawn light even crept in. The convent had stood here for centuries, nestled in a forgotten corner of medieval Europe where winters stretched long and comfort was a whispered legend. The pale blue of that winter dawn seeped through narrow windows, casting ghostly shadows on the damp, rough-hewn stone. Your footsteps echoed softly, the worn wooden floorboards creaking with each slow step, as if reluctant to reveal the countless secrets they held. The air was thick, redolent with the musty scent of candle wax and fabric long too damp, a scent that clung stubbornly to your skin and hair. Every breath brought the chill of a draft slipping, unseen, through cracks too old to mend. If losing your phone battery today felt like a small apocalypse, imagine this relentless cold stealing every ounce of warmth, like some cruel, unseen ghost. And no charger in sight. Your fingers, rough and trembling just slightly, worked the coarse weave of your habit as you prepared the thin porridge for the morning meal. Tasteless and gray, it was a humble sustenance, like chewing on the dull memory of better days. Somewhere down the stone corridor, a distant bell tolled, its steady chime marking the slow passage of another day lost to routine. Sweeping the ice-cold hallways with the same rhythm, stroke after stroke, you chased dust motes in the dim light, the broom's bristles whispering a monotonous hymn to the worn walls. Grain was next. The millstone groaned under your hands, spinning in slow, circular motions. The sound was hypnotic, a creak and grind that mirrored the unvarying cadence of convent life. Yet, between these breathless cycles, there stirred tiny sparks, whispers of secrets long buried. The bread sometimes held powdered limestone, a dull trick to stretch provisions that already felt as thin as your hope. The sisters weren't all as pious as their robes suggested. Between muted prayers and veiled glances lay mischief, quiet rebellions folded into the austere folds of habit and vow. The convent's quiet was a mask layered over something far more complex. Behind one faded door, a shadow lingered a moment too long, a sigh, a sudden hush when a name was mentioned, secrets swallowed alongside whispered confessions. You paused, the cold brush of the draft at your neck suddenly sharp, as if warning you to look closer. What dark stories were shut away behind these stone walls, hiding in plain sight beneath the surface of endless rituals? As the sun climbed higher, its weak light failing to warm the stones, the distant sound of a muffled argument, too low to be punishment, too sharp for prayer, hinted at tension threading through this supposed sanctuary. You couldn't help but wonder what scandals breathed quietly beneath the veneer of sanctity, waiting to unravel. Hey, before Morpheus takes you for good, do a quick check if you're still subscribed. For some, the button vanished, and I don't want you to miss the next sleepy stories. Drop a soft like a pillow, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Your interaction keeps this corner of calm alive. Thanks for being part of it. The muffled argument faded, swallowed by the thick stone walls that trapped centuries of secrets and whispered grievances alike. You paused mid-sweep. The broom's bristles paused just above a patch of stubborn dust, as your ears strained to catch more than the vague tension lingering in the air. The convent silence was no longer a calm lull, but a waiting breath, like the stillness before a storm breaks. Your hands, chilled from the early morning's cold porridge, and the chill crawling under your habit, sought small comforts. The smooth curve of the wooden handle beneath your fingers, the steady sound of it brushing against the rough floor. Tasks kept your mind tethered, but there was an itch beneath your skin, a restless need to know, to see beyond these ritual-bound walls. Turning down a narrow corridor, where light rarely reached and shadows clung like cobwebs, you spotted the faded tapestry, its colors bleached by countless winters, hanging lopsided on a wall. The figures woven there, saints and sinners alike, seemed to watch you with silent reproach. Imagine their indignation if they knew the simmering tensions that defied their sacred images. The muffled voices picked up again, fleeting fragments weaving through the cracks in the heavy oak door ahead. You crept closer, heart quickening as the words pierced the thick air. "She cannot continue like this," one whisper hissed. "The truth must be hidden." The cold air nipped at your exposed neck as you pressed your ear lower, hoping to catch more. But the voices slipped away, their owners retreating into vocal shadows that felt thicker and darker than the stone. The day that began so subdued was now turning into a puzzle wrapped in whispered secrets. And you were the unwilling detective, drawn deeper with each breath. As you stepped away, the floor moaned softly beneath your weight, spilling echoes that seemed almost loud enough to betray your presence. The convent pulsed quietly around you, its faded frescoes, stained glass windows cracked like spiderwebs, and corridors narrowing into claustrophobic silence, all composing a symphony of constraint. Here, the air was never still, but never free. You stopped before the chapel, where a faith once boomed and thundered in voices raised to the heavens, now reduced to solemn nods and half-hearted murmurs. The faint smell of incense struggled to mask the undercurrent of damp and neglect. Above you, the stained glass filtered light into shards, casting muted color patterns, catching the dust motes like tiny airborne jewels. A forgotten hymn, barely audible, fluttered from behind the choir screen. You traced its source, a frail voice rising and falling unevenly, echoing a devotion as pale as the winter daylight outside. Wonder briefly warmed the cold pit of your stomach. Despite the austerity and the weight of silence, life stubbornly pushed through. Somewhere a door creaked. Far from the chapel's fragile peace, the disturbance rattled your calm. You followed the sound, down a shadowed staircase. The stones beneath your feet were slippery from years of neglect. The air thickened with a scent sharp and foreign, like rust and old iron. It clung to the air like a warning. The stairwell opened up into a small, hidden chamber, dimly lit by a single candle sputtering against the drafts. The walls were lined with books, leather-bound, cracked, their gold-leaf titles faded like the history they contained. Your fingers trembled, brushing against the uneven spines, each volume a prisoner of forgotten knowledge. One book, thicker and heavier than the others, lay on a small wooden table. Its cover, embossed with a strange symbol you didn't recognize, seemed to pulse faintly, a heartbeat beneath the worn leather. You reached out, hesitating, the cold pressing against your skin, tightening with the moment. The candle flickered wildly, shadows dancing like specters on the walls. Pulling the book closer, the faint rustle of brittle pages sent a shiver down your spine. Between its covers, scribbles and drawings hinted at something forbidden. Names crossed out, dates twisted into cryptic codes, annotations that smelled of desperation and fear. A sudden noise stopped you, a footstep, quick and purposeful, echoing down the stairway. You froze, heart now pounding against the prison of your ribs. The candle guttered, threatening to die, and the chamber plunged towards swallowing darkness. You snatched the book and hidden it beneath your habit, just as a figure rounded the corner. A nun, her face pale and eyes wide, seemed startled to find you in this secret realm. For a moment, worlds collided in silence. Accusation, fear, and perhaps a sliver of sympathy flickering in her gaze. Without a word, she turned and vanished back up the stairs, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and unspoken truths. You stood alone, clutching the heavy book, the gravity of what you'd uncovered, pressing against your bones. Outside, the cold wind moaned through the narrow windows, the convent holding its breath as the day matured and shadows lengthened. Whatever riddles were woven into these stone walls had begun to unravel, and with them the safety of routine and quiet obedience. You tucked the book deeper beneath your robe, the weight of it an anchor and a torch at once. Somewhere beyond the frozen dawn and musty corridors, the truth waited, veiled in whispers and half hidden in silence. Now it was your turn to listen, and listen you would, no matter how long the night stretched, or how deeply the secrets wanted to stay buried. Because the convent was no sanctuary, it was a cage, and the key was in your hands. The moments stretched thin as you pressed your back against the cold, uneven stone of the hidden chamber. The heavy book swallowed beneath your robe like a secret heartbeat. The faint flicker of candlelight, tangling with gloom, cast moving shadows that seemed to beckon and recoil all at once. Outside, the convent remained wrapped in the same restless silence, as if holding its breath in uneasy anticipation. Your breath puffed in small white clouds, the numbering of heartbeats and the distant ticking of time blurring into one endless echo. The door's faint click somewhere upstairs reminded you that you were no longer alone in this place of whispered lies and guarded confessions. The nun's sudden retreat had left a trace, an unspoken invitation or a warning. It wasn't clear which. With nimble fingers, despite the cold stiffness creeping through your joints, you flipped the brittle pages. Letters tangled in hurried scrawls, dates twisted like cryptic knots, symbols that did not belong to sacred scripture. Everything pointed toward secrets wrapped tight in layers of fear and denial. You traced the inked names. Some crossed multiple times, others underlined with shaking urgency. A frigid shiver slid down your spine. These weren't just forgotten records. They were cries muffled under decades of prayer and stone. Steeling yourself, you tucked the tome closer and slid out of the cramped chamber. The stairwell welcomed you with its unchanging gloom, each step echoing with a soft resignation, as if the convent itself resented your intrusion. The air was thicker here, saturated with the scent of damp earth and rusted iron, a scent that hung on skin long after leaving. A faint murmur drifted up from somewhere deeper, a rhythmic scrape, almost mechanical, mixing with low voices that hovered just beyond understanding. The fragments were too muffled to catch fully, but a single phrase stabbed your memory, sharp and urgent. Cannot be allowed to continue. The weight of the words lingered like a cold draft, seeping through ancient cracks. As you reached the main floor, the afternoon sun hung low and weak, casting long skeletal shadows through the narrow windows. Dust shimmered in the slanting light. The convent, old and exhausted, seemed to lean further into decay, its walls whispering stories only half told, begging those who would listen. You let the book rest briefly on a stone ledge near the chapel entrance, the familiar scent of fading incense wrapping around you like a fragile shield. The corridor was empty, save for a single flicker of movement in the distance, a figure cloaked in habit, pausing as if sensing your presence. The brief glance exchanged was fleeting, but loaded. Fear, resolve, a twinge of warning. Or was it an unspoken plea for solidarity? You couldn't tell. The worn wooden floor beneath your feet groaned under the weight of history and hidden sins. The chill gnawed harder now, the day fading into the blue-gray steel of twilight. You drew your robe tighter, not just against the cold, but against the creeping realization. Trusting here was dangerous. The sanctuary you'd hoped for dissolved into shadows of doubt and suspicion. Winding back toward your sparse chambers, the muffled echoes of voices rose again from the convent's depths, this time sharper, edged in desperation and anger. The austere walls vibrated with unspoken threats. The routine prayers, the austere rituals, the whispered obedience. None could bury what clawed beneath. Outside, the brittle wind caught on the eaves, dragging a lone leaf across the frozen courtyard, a stubborn flicker of life amid stone and silence. You paused, eyes drawn to the leaf's fragile dance, a tiny rebellion against the winter's grip. For a moment, you allowed yourself to breathe in that fragile hope. But, as your footsteps carried you forward, a sudden sound shattered the fragile quiet, the heavy, unmistakable clang of metal dropping somewhere behind you. You froze, heart hammering like a prisoner's beat. You turned slowly toward the darkened corridor. There, just beyond the reach of flickering candlelight, lay a set of keys gleaming coldly on the stone floor. The keys to what? The question hung heavy in the air, the weight of possibilities pressing down. Had someone dropped them in haste? Or was this a trap, left to lure the curious deeper into the convent's labyrinth of secrets? Your fingers itched to reach out, but a deeper instinct held you back. This was no mere accident. The air grew still, denser, as if the very walls leaned in to watch your choice unfold. Clutching the hidden book tighter, you swallowed, the chills settling in your chest. Somewhere between the patience carved into centuries of stone and the restless hunger for truth, beating like a silent drum in your soul. A whisper found its voice. The convent's secrets were unraveling, and no amount of stone nor shadow could hold them back forever. You took a slow, steadying breath and stepped forward toward the keys, every nerve alight with the thrill and terror of what lay beyond the next door. The night was creeping close, and with it, the untold truths waiting to be unearthed. And in that still moment, as the candle sputtered low and the cold seeped further in, you realized this was only the beginning. The cold keys lay on the stone floor like a silent challenge, their metal glint faint through the flickering candlelight that trembled as if afraid to witness what might come next. You bent slowly, every movement measured, the weight of centuries pressing down with a quiet menace. The convent, unyielding, ever watchful, seemed to hold its breath alongside you. Your fingertips closed around the cold metal, the chill biting through your robe, slipping into your skin like a secret needle. You lift again, feeling the unexpected heft, imagining the lock they belonged to. What doors would these open, and which shadows would stir behind them? The scent of rust and old iron mixed with the ever-present dampness, a reminder that no stone here was untouched by time or silence. A distant murmur, like a thread unraveling in the still air, pulled at your senses. The convent's ancient heart beat steady but fragmented, its rhythm disturbed. Voices whispered from far down the corridors, a tremble of unease threading through the sanctuary. You pressed the keys tighter, a talisman against the encroaching dark. You didn't turn back. The worn floor groaned beneath your cautious steps. The draught found every crack, every fragile seam between stone and wood, and tugged at your habit like a restless spectre. The faint glow of daylight, waning towards the late afternoon, filtered weakly through the stained glass above, splattering broken hues onto your path. Reds turned to rust, blues to sorrow. Around you, the shadows gathered in familiar shapes. Arched doorways seemed to leer. Faded frescoes stared silently with eyes that had seen too much. The air smelled both sacred and betrayed, a mingling of incense, mildew, and something iron-tinged you couldn't quite identify. You reached the heavy door at the corridor's end, the one closer with each step, the muffled voices edging toward clarity. Snippets floated just beyond comprehension, words heavy with warning. Must not be revealed, too dangerous, before the others learn. Your heart hammered like a prisoner desperate for release, but your feet moved with deliberate calm. You were no longer just a silent observer in this place. Tonight, you crossed the threshold from shadows into the unknown. A sudden metallic scrape echoed sharply behind you. You froze, turning with slow suspicion. Nothing but empty cold. The keys felt heavier still in your hand, burdened with the weight of what you were about to unfold. Then, your eyes landed on a narrow crack beneath the door. Thin, but enough. A faint glow pulsed beyond, pale and unnatural, like moonlight filtered through a twisted lens. The air smelled different here, sharper, tinged with cold smoke and a faint trace of something floral, unsettlingly sweet. The lock should have resisted. It should have held fast to the convent's stale history. Yet now, your fingers brushed keys to old iron, and with a reluctant click, the first barrier yielded. The door creaked open, exhaling a breath of stale air and dust motes dancing like tiny phantoms in the sickly light. The room beyond yawned wide, a cellar, or perhaps a forgotten chamber, buried beneath layers of stone and piety. Your eyes adjusted slowly, taking in the bare walls and scattered relics covered in centuries of grime. A single, narrow window high above, decay and secrets wrapping around you like a shroud. In the dim corner, rough fabric gathered, a hoop skirt perhaps, or a discarded habit, its folds stained and frayed. Near it, a small pile of papers, edges curled and yellowed, held the promise of revelations long buried. Your breath froze for a moment in the chill. A low, spectral hum pulsed from the depths of the chamber, as if the stones themselves whispered warnings. You edged further in, heart thrumming, the book concealed beneath your robe, a cold weight against your side. Then, from the far end of the room, a shadow shifted. Not human, or at least not entirely. The faint scrape of nails on stone, the barely audible breath catching in the gloom. You swore the darkness moved with intent, alive in a way the convent's silence had not yet admitted. Your fingers tightened on the book's hidden spine. The convent's ancient heartbeat quickened. You were no longer alone. The key turned fully in the lock behind you, and deeper secrets stirred, awakening from a sleep that had lasted far too long. The chamber breathed around you, heavy with ancient dust and the slow decay of forgotten vows. The faint glow from the single high window trembled against the worn walls, casting or warnings hastily hidden. You knelt, fingers hesitating over the edges, the scent of old parchment rising like a ghost between your palms. The notes traced a tangled path of names and dates, some erased and rewritten as if the author wrestled with the truth before finally burying it beneath layers of cryptic code. A faint rustle startled you. Your breath caught and slowed, the candle's flicker magnifying the tension like a heartbeat quickening in a silent room. You scanned the shadows, searching for the source. Only the dance of darkness and light betrayed a presence too subtle to name. The convent held its breath once again, the air thickening like fog over a haunted moor. Moving carefully, you gathered a few of the papers into a trembling hand, the brittle edges threatening to crumble like everything here. Shallow traces of writing, notes scribbled into margins, hinted at a story of silent suffering, hidden sins, and fearful loyalty. The words weren't just records. They were a confession, cloaked in code, a desperate attempt to cry out without shattering the fragile peace or breaking the old pacts. The faint echo of footsteps drifted down the corridor. Heart pounding, you slipped behind a tattered cloth hanging from a rusty hook, a faded curtain that barely disguised a small alcove in the wall. The muffled voices filtered through, weaving uneasily through the thick stones. Cannot risk. The others must never know. If the truth surfaces, the fragments pulled at your nerves in slow, insistent waves. Breathing shallow, you pressed your back against the rough stone, trying to quell the restless storm inside. Trust here was a currency far too precious and far too dangerous. A dozen silent warnings whispered down the centuries, woven into every cracked tile and warped beam. Secrets were not meant to be free. The door at the far end creaked open, just enough to spill a sliver of icy light across the floor. You kept still, heart lodged in your throat as a small figure stepped cautiously inside. Her face, framed beneath a habit, was pale but resolute, eyes meeting yours for a brief, electric moment. There was a flicker of understanding, or perhaps warning, before she vanished again as silently as she appeared. The candle guttered, casting grotesque shadows on the chipped plaster, and the air felt colder still, as if the walls themselves resented your intrusion. The book beneath your robe throbbed with weight, half-buried secret, half-sentient thing urging you onward. It was not merely an object, but a key, though neither lock nor door had fully revealed themselves. Footsteps quickened in the hall outside, a hurried, tense rhythm that echoed with a new urgency. You rose slowly, pausing a moment to let the dust settle, like the quiet before a storm. The distant bell tolled, deeper and more insistent than before, dragging the convent's ancient soul toward some unknown reckoning. You moved through the shadowed hallways with purpose, the worn floor groaning under your cautious tread. A low wind ruffled the trailing edge of your robe, as if to warn you of the fragile line you walked between survival and discovery. The scent of damp stone mixed with sweet lavender, unexpected in these depths, a reminder that the convent's surface charm barely masked its tangled heart. Ahead, the heavy door with the lock you had just unfastened loomed like a dark mouth waiting to speak. You pressed the keys into your palm, their cold weight anchoring the rising tide of fear and anticipation. Slowly, deliberately, you fitted the heaviest key, the one inscribed with indistinct symbols, into the ancient lock. The mechanism protested, grinding with a reluctant groan as centuries of slumber began to unravel. With a final hesitant click, the door surrendered, swinging open on creaking hinges. A rush of stale air escaped, carrying the musty scent of long-shut spaces and the faintest hint of something metallic, bitter and sharp. Inside, the room yawned wide, swallowed in. Shadows deep as night. Cracked beams leaned precariously overhead. A single frail candle sputtered in the gloom, its flickering flame barely tracing the outlines of scattered relics. Loose stones littered the floor like forgotten bones, and the faintest draft whispered secrets from unseen corners. Your eyes caught a glimmer, a shimmer of cloth, tucked beneath a broken crate near the far wall. You approached, senses alert to the subtle shift as unseen eyes seemed to follow each step. The fabric was fragile and torn, a remnant of past lives, stained with age and the faint copper tinge of time's passing. A sudden noise, a soft scraping, made you freeze. The silence tore apart momentarily, revealing a breath caught too long and a subtle movement in the darkness. Something or someone was stirring, brushing the edge of visibility. Your fingers closed tighter around the book, concealed beneath your habit, the weight a solemn promise. The cold hush of the room pressed in, thickening with unspoken threats and ancient pacts. This place was alive in a way the convent refused to admit, alive with shadows that did not welcome interruptions. Then, just beyond the reach of the candlelight, a dark shape coalesced, slow and deliberate. You felt the shift. In the air, in the stones, in the trembling silence, that something old and watchful had awakened. Your breath caught, stranded between the musty past and the uncertain present. The door whispered closed behind you. The air in the hidden chamber tightened like the slow squeeze of a breath held underwater. You could feel the weight of the book beneath your robe, a solid reminder of forbidden knowledge pressing insistently against your side. The faint flicker of the dwindling candle cast trembling shadows that seemed to lean closer, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. Your fingertips, cold and tentative, brushed over the edges of the scattered papers. The ink was smudged, blurred from decades of moisture, but the handwriting was desperate, hurried, a secret scripted in fear. You caught fragments of phrases amidst the broken sentences. Betrayals born in silence, oaths broken under shattered vows, names swallowed by the dust of time. A sudden creak above you snapped your head upward. The convent breathed again, uneasy, watchful. You pressed your back against the rough stone as footsteps approached, soft and hesitant, yet deliberate. The door to the chamber's alcove shifted just a fraction, spilling a narrow sliver of dim light onto the floor. A figure appeared, wrapped in habit, her pale face framed by the coarse fabric that had seen far better days. Her eyes, large and wary, met yours for a heartbeat stretched thin by unspoken understanding. There was no accusation, only something deeper, an unvoiced alliance forged in shadows. Without a word, she slipped a folded scrap into your hand, the paper rough but heavy with invisible weight. Her gaze flickered toward the stairwell and then back, pressing a single finger to her lips in a silent warning. The moment hung suspended, taut and fragile, before the door closed softly behind her, swallowing her away into the convents were fewer but sharper, a terse message carved beneath the convent's facade. They watch. The past claws beneath the stone. Trust few. The candle flickered violently, shadows fracturing like cracked glass. A cold draft whispered through the chamber's cracked window, making the flame dance as if frightened. The air was dense, sour with secrets too long confined, heavy with promises of revelation and the threat of ruin. You rose carefully, clutching the book and the note as you retreated from the alcove. The stairwell greeted you with its familiar chill, ancient stones slick underfoot. The quiet murmurs of the convent twisted through the corridors, disjointed breaths and fragments of conversation, whispers that seemed both urgent and cautious. As you moved through the fading light, the stained glass shifted with the setting. Sun's last sighs, painting the walls with rusted reds and muted blues, colors that felt more dead than alive. Somewhere deep, a bell tolled again, slow, resolute, like the heartbeat of a place caught between sanctity and decay. Ahead, the heavy door whose lock you had wrestled open stood like a mouth waiting to speak truths long swallowed. Your hand closed tighter around the keys, metal, cold and unyielding, a reminder that some doors open to light, others to darker shadows. The distant rasp of movement snagged your attention. From the periphery of the corridor, a figure emerged, slow and deliberate. Cloaked in habit, she paused with a glance, sharp and measuring, eyes narrowing just enough to freeze your blood. That moment, a frozen fragment in time, warning or challenge, you could not tell. The floor groaned beneath your feet as you passed, the convent's ancient bones creaking their protest. A scent rose, faint but undeniable, an unexpected hint of lavender trailing like a ghost among the cold stone and damp wood. It mingled with the pervasive musk of mold and old wood, a whisper of beauty tangled with decay. You tucked the book closer, as if to shield yourself from both the cold and the weight of what you carried. With each step, you tucked the book closer, as if to shield yourself from both the cold and the weight of what you carried. The uneasy buzz of voices grew, a low current of tension threading through the stone corridors, stitching unease into the very fabric of the with a reluctant groan, opening onto a chamber swallowed in gathering shadows. Inside, the air was thick with dust and forgotten things. Faint outlines of broken crates and fallen beams crept in and out of the candlelight's failing glow. The scent of rust and old iron wrapped around you, distant and sharp. Near the far wall, a lump of fabric caught your eye, frayed, stained, crumpled, like the last remnant of a forgotten life. As you stepped closer, a subtle movement stirred in the dark corner beyond. A whisper of breath, barely a scrape, as if the shadows themselves had taken form. You tightened your grip on the hidden book, heart thrumming against the prison of your ribs. The convent had stilled, but beneath its silence pulsed something ancient, watching. Your breath caught between past and present as a shadow slowly detached itself from the gloom. Too deliberate to be chance, too slow to be imagined. The heavy door whispered shut behind you, sealing away the world beyond. And in that darkness, the silent watcher exhaled. The darkness behind the door was a thin veil stretched over something far deeper. A secret, breathing quietly in the stillness. Your fingers lingered on the cold metal key for a beat longer, as if testing the quiet will of this abandoned chamber before pushing the heavy door inward. It protested with a groan that scraped like a last whispered warning, then yielded reluctantly. Inside, the air smelled of forgotten things, damp stone, dry rot, a faint copper tang that suggested old blood or rust, or perhaps both. Your eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light filtering through that narrow window high above, where the last fading rays of the sun barely touched dust motes, dancing lazily in the stillness. You stepped inside, the stone floor uneven beneath your feet, coated in the soft grit of centuries. There was no warmth here, only the cold certainty of something buried and waiting. A broken crate lay against the far wall, its splintered edges catching the candlelight like bones. Nearby, a moldy drape, remnants of what might have once been a habit or some tattered finery, rested in mournful folds. The fabric's faded weave whispered of lives long past, stories eroded like the stones themselves. As you moved further in, the faint sound of your breathing seemed loud, a fragile pulse in the thick silence. Then, almost imperceptibly, a noise, a subtle shuffle, the soft scrape of nails against stone or wood, set the hairs on your neck trembling. The room's shadows shifted, whispering secrets your eyes almost caught, but never quite. There was something else in this darkness, something alive, but not wholly human. Your fingers tightened around the heavy book beneath your habit. The weight felt both anchor and beacon, a talisman against the fear chasing your spine. The convent no longer felt like a place of sanctuary. Here, beneath its worn surface, something restless clawed at the edges of the present. The door creaked softly behind you, sealing shut with a finality that echoed in the hollow chamber. A cold draft stirred, slipping through cracks unseen, ruffling loose parchment near your feet. You stooped to collect the scattered papers, brittle, yellowed and fragile like dried leaves pressed between time's pages. Their fragile weight in your hands belied the heaviness of their message. Ink scrawled hurriedly across margins, symbols tangled with names and dates, some crossed repeatedly or overwritten in urgent desperation. You traced the frantic loops and lines. A coded confession woven beneath layers of fear and denial. These were not mere records. They were cries smothered under stone and prayer, whispers of betrayal and broken vows hiding in plain sight. The air thickened as footsteps approached from the dark corridor. You pressed your back against the cold wall, heart hammering, barely daring to breathe. The door's shadow shifted, spilling a sliver of dim light across your refuge. A figure entered, a nun, her face pale and drawn, eyes wide but carrying a flicker of resolve. Her glance locked with yours, a fleeting moment heavy with unspoken alliances and silent warnings. Without a word, she slipped a folded scrap into your trembling hand, then pressed a finger to her lips in a stark plea for secrecy. Her retreating footsteps dissolved into the convent's echoing silence. You unfolded the note cautiously, words etched sharply, a warning carved beneath the convent's surface calm. They watch. The past claws beneath the stone. Trust few. The flickering candle trembled, casting fractured shadows that danced like shards of broken glass. The scent of cold rot mixed with a faint trace of lavender, a fragile note of beauty tangled in decay. You rose, clutching the book and note close, each step heavy but determined. The stairwell welcomed you back with its familiar chill, the worn stone slick and unyielding. The convent's murmured voices swirled around you, disjointed but laden with unease, fragments of secrets flirting with exposure. The fading light filtered through stained glass, painting the passage with muted hues of rust and sorrow. Somewhere a bell tolled again, deeper and more urgent, threading through the ancient bones of the place. Ahead, the heavy door, where secrets had long been imprisoned, awaited. The keys in your palm grew colder, their weight an anchor to the storm building beneath your skin. From the corner of your eye, a figure materialized, habit-clad, slow and deliberate. Her eyes locked on yours with a cold sharpness, and for a frozen heartbeat, time wavered between warning and challenge. Then she vanished into the shadows as swiftly as she came, leaving only the heavy air buzzing with unspoken threats. You turned back to the door, pressing the largest key into the lock. The mechanism groaned with reluctant submission, grinding down centuries of silence. The door gave way, creaking open onto a chamber devoured by shadows. Inside, dusty relics and broken beams whispered a forgotten reverence. The air was thick with rust and old iron, a metallic scent sharp enough to bite into your lungs. And beneath it all, the faintest hint of something sour and unnatural. Near the far wall, your eyes caught a movement. A loose bundle of fabric lay crumpled like a mournful relic. As you stepped closer, a shadow slid silently from the darkness, slow, deliberate, watching. The room trembled with a quiet menace, the heavy book pressing cold and alive beneath your habit. The convent's breath hung suspended, caught between a past too violent to forget and a present fraught with peril. The door whispered closed behind you, walls leaning in to swallow the light. And in that suffocating darkness, a presence breathed, old as stone, patient as the grave. You were not alone. The heavy door sighed closed behind you, the ancient lock's reluctant click, sealing the chamber in shadows thicker than dusk. Your fingers curled tightly around the book beneath your habit, its leather weight a steady pulse against your ribs, a silent reminder that you held more than just worn pages. The air inside the room was dense, saturated with the scent of mold and cold stone, laced faintly with something metallic and bitter, like iron stained by time itself. Your eyes strained to pierce the dimness. Faint beams of dying sunlight filtered through the small, high window, slicing thin and mournful across dust-speckled air. The outlines of broken crates and fallen beams emerged, like silent sentinels guarding secrets long buried. Each step you took stirred whispers from the floor's grit, sounds small but weighty in this suffocating stillness. Near the back wall, a tattered piece of fabric lay twisted, fragile and stained, a discarded remnant of forgotten days. As you approached, the shadows seemed to shift around the fold, curling like a living thing. A sudden scrape, soft and deliberate, sent a shiver chasing down your spine. Breath caught tight, you slowed, senses sharpening beyond reason. This darkness was not empty. It breathed. It watched. Your grip on the hidden book tightened, the cold pressing through layered cloth to anchor you in the present. The convent was no sanctuary. It was a tomb of whispered fears and restless ghosts, both human and otherwise. A faint breeze stirred near the cracked stone beneath your feet, a chilling pulse like a sigh from the walls themselves. The candle you carried flickered, trembling against uninvited drafts slipping through ancient cracks. Flickers of light fractured into chaotic patterns, shadows leaping and retreating, as if the room's silence were an uneasy pact ready to break. Sudden movement drew your gaze to the furthest corner, where darkness pooled and shivered. There something shifted, a shape, slow and deliberate, dissolving into the gloom like smoke caught in a draft. Eyes, if they belonged to anything alive, hid behind a veil of shadow, too patient and too alert. You swallowed the sudden tightness gripping your throat and let your breath fall steady again. This was not your hallucination or the trick of poor light. Something rooted in these stones stretched out from the past, watching, waiting. The heavy book beneath your robe throbbed against your side, like a heartbeat syncing with your own, a tether in the enveloping darkness. Nearly paralyzed by a blend of fear and curiosity, you took a step forward, the floor grumbling low beneath your foot, a reluctant sound like a whispered warning. The air grew cooler, sharper, as if the very atmosphere conspired to sheath this place in dread. There was a presence here, something neither wholly seen nor spoken, lurking just below the veil, where light failed and suspicion thrived. Suddenly, displaced dust twirled slowly by your feet. You bent, fingers grazing aged parchment, sprawled like fallen leaves beneath a broken stool. Their edges frayed, the script smeared and hurried, words penned in desperation and coded in fear. Desperate names, cryptic symbols, crossed-out dates, confessions concealed within riddles, cries buried beneath enforced silence and ancient vows. Each line wove a tapestry of betrayal and broken faith, stories locked tight in the convent's cold embrace. With trembling fingers, you gathered the fragile sheets, the rustle loud in the heavy chamber. The candles sputtered violently, shadows crawled like creeping things, and the walls seemed to lean in closer, listening, waiting. A sudden noise startled you. A soft, hurried tread resonated through the stone corridor beyond. You pressed your back against the cold wall, heart hammering ragged against your ribs. The faintest crack of light leaked beneath the door's edge, and a figure slipped through the gloom, a nun, her face pale and sharp, eyes burning with a mixture of fear and fierce resolve. Her gaze locked with yours, an electric pulse exchanged, not accusation, not plea, but a silent covenant formed in the brittle shadows. Without a word, she slipped something small and folded into your palm, a silent caution. Her finger raised to trembling lips, a command muted but clear. Keep this secret, She vanished before you could speak, her footsteps swallowed swiftly by the convent's restless silence. Unfolding the scrap, your breath caught, a terse warning scrawled in hurried strokes. They watch. The past claws beneath the stone. Trust few. The words hovered between you and the dark, an icy pulse that wrapped tighter than any chain. You rose carefully, the weight of the book and note, heavy but vital. Each step retraced through the stale stairwell was an echo against centuries of neglect. The stones, slick with moisture and time. The convent murmured around you, voices fractured and cautious, fragments of secrets barely contained. Outside the dim stairwell, stained glass fractured of the place and urging the night onward. The door you had forced open loomed ahead once more. The largest key, cold and worn beyond memory, pressed into your palm with an unspoken gravity. You knew this was no ordinary lock. Behind you, a whispered scrape froze your blood. From the corridor's edge, a shadow peeled away, habit-clad, slow, watching. Her eyes, sharp and unreadable, held your gaze just long enough to unsettle, then disappeared like breath on glass. You fitted the key into the lock, resistance groaning beneath your touch. The door yielded with a hesitant creak, groaning open onto a chamber swallowed whole by gathering dusk. Inside, relics lay buried under dust and time. Cracked beams, splintering crates, the musty scent of rust and decay mixed with something older, darker. Near the far wall, a dark shape stirred, just beyond the fragile glow of your candlelight, moving with cautious intent. You clenched the book beneath your robe, the cold stone pressing against your skin through restless shadows. The door whispered closed behind you. The convent held its breath. And in the heavy darkness, waiting, something ancient and silent stirred again. The heavy door settled into its ancient frame with a final, echoing thud, as if exhaling the long-held breath. The shadows inside the chamber softened, no longer threatening, but folding around you like a worn blanket. Thick with age, yes, but also strangely comforting. Your fingers unclenched slightly on the book beneath your habit, the weight now part of your stride rather than a burden. The dim light from the lone window, now, touched by the slow sinking sun, pooled on the cracked stone floor like liquid gold. Not much warmth, but enough to break the deep chill pressing at your bones. Dust swirled lazily in the calm air, catching the light and scattering it across ancient relics and forgotten corners. This place, with all its secrets and silence, was a crossroads where the past met the fragile present, and you stood right at its heart. Gathering the brittle papers once more, you traced the hurried script with a gentleness born from respect and sorrow. The confessions etched into these pages weren't just ink on parchment. They were lifelines thrown from desperate souls, whispers of rebellion, pain, and hidden truths. Names once erased from memory began to resurface, their shadows stretching long across the convents. Stone, the nun's secret warning. They watch. The past claws beneath the stone. Trust few, reverberated quietly in your mind. Yet here, in the muted peace of this chamber, the fear felt less like prison bars and more like fragile glass, ready to be shattered. You felt that delicate crack open within yourself, the stubborn hope that even the heaviest shadows could be faced and perhaps, eventually, softened. A slow rhythm began to pulse around you, the faint ticking of time's relentless march. Outside, somewhere muffled by walls and floors steeped in centuries, a bell tolled again. Not a summons, but an echo, an ancient heartbeat that tethered the past and future together in quiet continuity. Intent on this fragile promise, you rose and moved towards the farthest corner of the chamber. There, beneath, a shadowed alcove, lay the remnants of forgotten lives, a tattered habit, stained and threadbare, and the frayed edges of a hoop skirt. You knelt, fingers brushing fabric that had borne silent witness to the convent's hidden stories. The weight of countless winters, prayers, and secrets hung heavy here. You let your hand rest a moment longer, as if honoring that silent history. The candle, sputtering low and brave, cast flickering light that danced like the last embers of a dwindling fire. In that trembling glow, the atmosphere shifted from fear to reverence. This was not the tomb of forgotten sins, but a vault of resilience, silent courage folded into stone and scripture. Footsteps echoed softly from above, the faintest sign that life, despite its fears and shadows, persisted. You tucked book and papers safely beneath your robe, feeling their steady weight not as confinement, but as charge. The truth, raw, unsettling, and necessary, was no longer buried in silence. As you ascended the worn stairs, the heavy door closed behind you with a gentle sigh, sealing the chamber once more. But the convent no longer felt like a cage. Instead, it was a threshold where secrets had been faced, and a thread of hope was woven into its ancient fabric. The corridors, usually oppressive with their thick shadows, now seemed to breathe with a subtle ease. The faint scent of lavender lingered, not as a mask, but as a delicate trace of life thriving beneath neglect. The stained glass windows caught the fading light, painting rusty reds and muted blues across the worn floor. For a moment, the beauty of decay and endurance intertwined like an old melody, melancholy, yet somehow soothing. Passing through the empty halls, a distant murmur of voices rose, not conspiratorial whispers, but quiet exchanges, tentative and cautious, as if the air itself was learning to speak again. The convent's soul, bruised but stubborn, stirred awake. You reached your modest chamber as twilight deepened, closing the door softly behind you. The cool air settled into a gentler calm. The heavy book rested on the wooden table, opened to pages worn but steadfast, a testament to stories that refused oblivion. Settling down, you allowed the silence, now free from its oppressive weight, to unfold around you. The convent outside exhaled steady breaths, long, slow, sure. Darkness wrapped its velvet cloak around the night. But beneath its surface, a new day whispered promises yet to come. You closed your eyes, the quiet finally a balm to the restless spirit. The cold that once gnawed at your flesh softened into a distant memory as your mind drifted, carried by the lingering scent of candle wax and old parchment, by the resilient pulse of truth uncovered, and the gentle acceptance of what could not be undone. Outside, the wind whispered again through stone eaves. A lullaby, older than the convent itself. Somewhere, a bell tolled its fading call, slow and patient, as if inviting you to rest, to dream, and to hold on to the fragile light that never really dies. And as that fragile glow settled deep within, the cold walls finally began to feel like home.